Hello and welcome to yet another amazing quick start. Today we have two new quick starts and we have an amazing special guest, Rosalyn Green from the Delaware Oggs Chapter Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. But before I tell you about the quick starts, I want to talk to you about books because we love books as genealogists. So there's a lot of things that genealogists do for self-education. And so one book that if you really want to get a deep dive into the topic of land records, this is the book that you should have for self-study. It is Land and Property Research in the United States by E. Wade Hone. It is an amazing book and it's a deep study. Land records deserve that because there's so much going on with land records. Today, we're going to have two quick starts. One quick start is talking about indexes. I was just at the Philly archives and wow, whenever you go researching, even if you're online browsing those images at Family Search, it's important to understand indexes. So Jim and Michael are going to not only talk to you about the different types of indexes there are, but how to get creative because your family requires you be a little creative sometimes. Our special guest, Rosalyn, I'm going to tell you more about her when we start up, but Rosalyn has been very, very supportive of Genealogy Quick Start, and I'll share with you how. But first, she had a very fortuitous event. And it helped her to break a brick wall. And there are so many books out there that can help you with those. And the ones that I'm going to show you, they've been around for a while, so you could probably pick them up cheaply. But to break your big brick walls, you have to sometimes do things differently. And so one of the books that I have, it's kind of a set. They used to have them all the time. Family Chronicle, which used to be a magazine. They have More Brick Wall Solutions for Genealogical Problems. I love this because just lots of little examples of things and how they solve them. This is an oldie but a goodie. It's the family tree problem solver. And so it takes all kinds of situations that we're in all the time, like finding birth and death marriages. Death marriages. That didn't come out right. Finding births, deaths, and marriages. Really good book. And, my absolute favorite book for thinking differently is by our quick start guy, Genealogy Tip of the Day by Michael John Neal. Jim uses this as his Bible to think about what kind of quick starts we're going to do for the show because Michael just has such a wealth of different ideas that I've never even thought of before. So take a look and check out Genealogy Tip of the Day. All right. So before I bring on our quick starters, I want to ask you, are you subscribed to Genealogy Quick Start? Please definitely subscribe to our newsletter so that you can keep on top of what's going on. So without further ado, let me bring on the two quick starters that keep this thing going is James M. Beidler. Hello, Jim, columnist and editor James M. Beidler, as well as Michael John Neal. Are you guys able to see me? Rosalind said that people can only see a blank screen.
I am able to see you, but you are mostly frozen. There apparently are some technical problems, but the good news is I think everybody can hear us.
Okay, good. Okay, sorry about that.
You're reminding me of Elsa in that movie Frozen, but like Jim said, the audio was fine, but yeah, you're freezing up, but just keep talking because we can hear you just fine.
Okay, fantastic. I am going to say, so we have Rosalyn coming on talking about how a document actually broke open a brick wall, led to so many different things. Do you have any examples of a document that broke a brick wall for you?
What example do I have that didn't break open a brick wall?
All right, so I
Yeah.
guess you go ahead.
Well, I can't think of one off the top of my head. Michael probably has one. So.
I would say it's a court case from early 19th century Virginia where they try to settle an estate without going through probate, which goes well for about 2 years. Then they end up in court for understandable reasons, and that court testimony and affidavits delineate all the relationships that were unclear from other documents. It spelled it out. You know, when you track the money and the inheritance, that usually spells it out, and that's what it did in the court records.
Follow the money, right?
Yep.
So if you can still hear me, we have some folks here. If if you're here, please definitely, we want to know who you are, where you are, and which genealogy group you are representing. So let me see if we have any comments besides I'm frozen. Hello, Jean from Collegeville, PA. Yes, and we have Valerie Ann, we know from GSP. Hello, Judy from Chicagoland. So good to have you here today. Joe caught on to my death marriages comment.
Freudian slip there, but
Hey, Wanda Looney from Birmingham. So let's go ahead and get started with our quick start. I really love indexes. They can be they can be a shining light and also the death of us if we don't really know what's going on. So what do you exactly mean when you say through an index darkly? What does that mean?
well, it's a play on a science fiction novel and movie called Through a Scanner Darkly, but we won't get into that, as Michael is often want to say. And you know, basically we're talking about. Or at least I found, you know, this you mentioned about Michael's genealogy tip of the day book as being my Bible, and it really is. A lot of our quick starts come from me looking at one of those and being inspired, and this was one of those cases where I was thinking about creative uses of indexes and just the fact that sometimes we rely a little too much on searching modern constructed databases that were constructed right now, as opposed to old school indexes that may not be subject to the same OCRing errors and so forth. They may have other errors of their own, but that these old school indexes should not be neglected. That was my point of bringing it up, and Michael seemed to bite on it. So
Yeah, my thought was similar. We rely on the indexes that are modern, either by humans or AI or what have you, and many of the local records that we use don't have every name indexes, but they have indexes to primary individuals that were created contemporarily to the records being created by clerks that probably knew the people that were in the records. So the names get to be written. Handwriting may be a little dicey in some cases, but they knew the names of the individuals, so they sometimes are a little more accurate. They're just not as in-depth and comprehensive by their nature, but they can be an excellent tool that we do want to use when the modern indexes, if you will, fall short. And many times people aren't aware. We're so used to just typing a name into an database, clicking, and it comes up. We look at the image. We don't realize there were indexes originally for those records handwritten that are also digitized as well that we can utilize.
Yes, you got to be able to go old school too, right? Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, because once in a while there's a situation where an index has survived, but the records have not.
Oh, yeah.
Which may may result in something that's useless, or one case not involving a direct line ancestor of mine, but of a friend of mine, uh, was that it detailed a court case. The original court case had been lost, but the index explained that it was a daughter-in-law suing her father-in-law. And also implied what the result was of that. Or another case where a certain parish's church records were bombed out in World War II, German church records, but the index survived. And fortunately, the index had more than just names and page numbers, but it also listed a relationship
Oh,
for each of
nice.
those. So it was a way to reconstruct some families.
Yes, yes. I see those dockets. I get what you mean about the court cases. Sometimes you
Yeah,
find the dockets, and I feel like I'm not being a good researcher because I can't find the court case, but might not have survived, right?
correct.
All right.
Correct.
Let's go through an index darkly. Let's get started with our quick start. So step one, of course, is was the record set indexed? So what kind of record sets are we talking about, and how do we find out if they've been indexed?
The
Well, the
ones
ones
that
that are always indexed are going to be land records and naturalization records, things that are heavy duty court records. So keep going, Michael.
Oh, I was just going to say, a lot of the local records that we use, even vital records and marriage records and things like that, the local clerk created an index for their own finding purposes to those. And so if you're looking at the actual records, you want to make sure you've looked to see if there's an index. We'll talk about sometimes there might even be multiple local indexes to a set of record,
Yes.
just kind of depending upon the time period and the location. Um,
And sometimes there's like the index in the book, and then there's the index that is like a
a
separate
master
kind of
index, yeah,
index.
yeah.
And
Cumulative
so,
index.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you got to get all the indexes, because all of that indexing, things happen and letters and numbers change. And so, yeah,
And the one
was
thing
it?
you want to remember before we go on to step two is different locations may have different types of indexes than others have. In terms of land records in the United States, is probably the best example. In federal land states where we have sections and townships and that, there's often a tract or a lot index that is a geographic index based on where the property was located. In the eastern United States, where there are meets and bounds, it's a little more difficult to have that type of an index. And so that index is geographical, serves a very big purpose in addition to an alphabetical index. So you just got to be aware of all those locally created indexes.
Yes. And I was trying to find my index book. Christine Rose wrote a book. She wrote a book on indexes. It's a really cute book, and I'll find it and share it with you. But it tells you all about the different indexes. I just like looking at it and trying to figure out what the heck they're doing. Um, all right. So are we ready for step two? All right.
Yep.
Step two is to locate the index. So are there any tricks for locating the index? I think I already started trying to talk about it.
Well, either I can't remember which one of you was the one who started that there might be each volume like of the deeds or each volume of the wills or administrations might be indexed. And then later on they came along, when there's 15 different books indexes to try to look at, hey, let's compile a cumulative master index. So you may have two sets of things like that. The volume by volume indexes I often find are helpful if I'm, obviously I know a certain county, for instance, and a certain time period, and I want to go to that volume and see what's in that
Mhm.
to go through that index.
The place to start would be to look in the family search catalog for the location. look in the land and property or court and probate, whatever it is you're focused on, and in their cataloging entries for that record type, look and see if it mentions indexes. And then, of course, it may mention individual volumes being indexed, but you won't know that until you drill down to the actual volume. The one thing you want to remember, though, is Family Search did not necessarily microfilm everything and eventually digitize it. I know we mentioned a little bit earlier the tract indexes that are a geographic index to land records. That's one of the indexes they typically did not microfilm when they
Oh,
microfilmed other. And there's a big value in that index because of how it's
yeah.
organized differently. But they did not microfilm that. So that you might want to also look at the actual location itself to see if there's other finding aids that are not digitized, even if a lot of other material happens to be.
Yeah.
And I found the book, and let's see if I can show it to you without being blank or frozen. It's Courthouse Indexes, illustrated by Christine Rose, and it's a nice little thin book, and it's just fabulous. It's just really fabulous. All right, so that was step 2. Locate the index. Multiple types of indexes available for you. I think the one that I trust the least is the combined, like the big one of like multiple years. Like it seems like they really kind of screw that one up. All right, step 3. Learn about the different types of indexes. So I stepped on your thing again. So yeah, here's one way. Is there another way? Because sometimes they give you clues on the page.
A lot of it is trial and error, to be really honest with you. And one suggestion, if it's in a new area where you're unfamiliar with the index, to use land records again as an example, pull out a deed book and turn to a certain page, or find it online, and then go to the index and see if you can find that specific reference in the index.
Go in reverse.
Go in it all depends on what your skill set is. If you've used a lot of these indexes, you don't have to do that. But if it's one that looks a little wonky or different from, I know when I first did some work in upstate New York, they were organized a little bit differently from other locations. And so that's what I just grabbed one at random from a deed book, and then I went to the indexes to see if I could find it. Just a little bit of backwards practice.
Yeah, sounds like some a math professor would do. So
perhaps.
So one thing that I learned recently going to the Philly archives is that they have, like, I'm used to just getting the deed index and then get the deed, book page number. But they had this intermediary step where you provide the street address, and then they had these abstracts. And I was like, dude, you slowing me down. Like, what just give me the deed index and let me go. But these abstracts were another form of kind of index, and they were the same lot and all of the different land deeds that went with that lot.
Right. That's a geographic index, and that was done for title abstractors when they were doing title work. It was faster. They weren't made for us, but the geographic indexes were really made for when they're doing a title search. It's a lot faster. That index was supposed to have all the entries for that lot, for that house. They could go look for they're looking for liens and mortgages to make sure the title's clear. And that's the purpose of that index. But if you're a person owned that land for generations or for a while or had a lot of documents, that's much faster way to find those than going through grantor grantee indexes.
Yep. Understood. I get it now. I'm not as, familiar with city research. So I never encountered this before. And of course, you told me it's not even created for us. It was created for someone else, but very useful.
Judy in the chat asked about that. The geographic index is tipped there in some large urban areas, like Shamel mentioned, a variety of places in the United States. And then in rural areas, they're more common in states that are federal land states, where we've got townships and sections and range, because that grid really makes it easier to make that kind of an index or finding aid.
Yes. Thank you for keeping up with the chat for me. Do we want to just go for the last 2 steps and then share, or are we ready to share? Last 2 steps. So use indexes creatively. We might need to share to do that, right?
Yeah. I'll show you some examples. Yep.
All right. So let's go and start with the first one.
Mine aren't too creative, but this is
Okay.
this is an example of the general or cumulative or master index that Chamel talked about. I just grabbed a page from the A's. This is from Trust Deed 24 and Trust Deed um, 25. The thing to make certain when you're looking at indexes to deed records is that are the indexes that you're using, do they index all deeds? Are they just doing the mortgages or the releases or the whatever? Make sure you're getting all the indexes. And that's the advantage to using some kind of master index, because it will typically include all of those. But in this example, it's breaking them out one book at a time. So you want to make sure you go through all the A's, because it's doing the trust deeds, probably the warranty deeds are later, quick claims maybe later. You want to make sure you go through all the A's, and then even within the A's, they're not purely alphabetical. They're in they're in with the A's, but then they're just based on what page number, because they're entering these in this index as they're entered in the deed book. So it's not a strict alphabetical index, but we got to remember how these things were made before computers and all that. That's why they're a little bit structured a little bit differently than um, we might think they would be.
And sometimes it's the first letter of the last name, and then they might have the first letter of the first name all together, all the A's, all the B's. And it could just be really
Right.
kind
So
of a trip.
Barnabas Abernathy and Barbara Abner, they would be together, and then you'd have Christian Abernathy and whatever. I'm not going
Yeah.
to think of all
Yeah.
those names, but you get the idea there. This is an example of one that we mentioned. There's an index in each individual volume. So this came from
Yeah.
Deed Book C, wherever this county was at. And then again, this is the A section of that, and then it's giving the individual page numbers. The drawback to using the individual volumes is if you don't know when the document was recorded, because deeds are recorded in order they're brought into the courthouse.
Yeah.
It might be a large time period, but if this is one more index, and like Jim mentioned, they may be in one index but not in the other one for whatever
Right.
reason.
And I find these especially useful if I'm working on microfilm or a digital product that's set up like microfilm page after page, that I just want to go to the beginning of that book's digital images and look at that index and see what else, what other relatives or people from the neighborhood might be listed in there.
All right. Let's see. What do we have here?
This was a marriage index. We've been talking about deed. This was a marriage index. You just want to make certain when you're looking at any of these that before you go to the index itself, read the prefatory material so you know how it's structured and what time period it covers. If that's indicated there, this is the female section. Then there's a whole different volume for the males. Then it's alphabetical, but again, it's chronological based on when the marriages were returned and recorded at the local records office. And I just thought this spine was really neat. Make certain you're understanding what you've got. This is a one book, and in the front of the book, it's the verse. In the back of the book, it's the death. And I can't remember if the deaths are in reverse order or not. I've used it a lot, but it's been a while. But they may combine things in a weird way for whatever reason. And usually look at the prefatory material so you know what's in there if it's something you've not used before.
And
Excellent
sometimes
advice.
the blacks will be in the back.
Yes.
All right. Oh, I think we have
or in a separate series of records too, potentially.
Yes, could be separate. Yep, totally separate, but equal. No, just kidding. What do we have here, Jim?
Here we have the Berks County, Pennsylvania Recorder of Deeds site, and it's just demonstrating that in addition to being able to do a digital search of all the deeds, they have also loaded the original indexes, grantee and grantor indexes, from when the county was founded in 1752. So you can go old school back to those indexes as a double check if you're not finding what you think you should be finding. So
while you're bringing up the other one, the whole state of Maryland has a website dedicated to Maryland land deeds, organized in a similar structure to this for the whole state on the Maryland State Archives website.
That's very nice. A lot of locations, especially urban areas, allow you to at least see the indexes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't know before I went to the Philly archives that there was one online. So I wasted some time there. Yeah. And rookie mistake. All right.
Okay, this is a page from the Hamburg embarkation lists, which is a database on Ancestry now. Hamburg was the second leading port of exit from the European continent in the 19th century. So a lot of people, principally Germans, but other people from Central and Eastern Europe, left via the port of Hamburg. And a lot of times they are more detailed than our passenger arrival lists. You know, because you think, oh yeah, I got them arriving in New York or Philly or wherever. That's great, but where the arrival list may just say they're from Prussia, which narrows you down to half of Germany. These embarkation lists may give you an actual town name in Prussia. So these are an important resource. Now, why are we talking about them in the context of indexes? Well, let me tell you. You go to you go to the next slide, which shows the interface on Ancestry for, they call them Hamburg passenger lists, which I strenuously object to, because then you think, oh, it's people going into Hamburg. No, it's people leaving Hamburg. That's why we should call them embarkation lists.
Yeah.
And what we have circled in the lower right corner is the fact, in addition to digital images of those actual passenger lists, embarkation lists, like I just showed you, there are also handwritten indexes. And because the handwriting's so bad on a lot of the actual indexes, this can be useful to you if you know a time period or if you know an exact ship. That if we go to the next slide, these handwritten indexes you can hone in, and they, for the most part, are in excellent penmanship. You know, so it's another way of finding them. And I like to give a hat tip to Joe Everett, who's now at the BYU library. He was at Ancestry when they acquired rights to the Hamburg embarkation list, and he fought like the devil to get those handwritten indexes up on there. But I had always instinctively known that it had to be a real genealogist, not some Ancestry exec who had decided to do this. And when Joe told me, I'm like, I knew it. So he's a hero.
Go Joe.
And then also another Ancestry database, a key resource for Germans in the first wave time period in colonial times is Pennsylvania German Pioneers. It has an index. Yeah, that's great. But you know, so many of the names were butchered up or alternate spellings and so forth, that sometimes you just can't find people. What I've done occasionally is go to the Ancestry database, even though I have these books in my home library, put in a first name if it's not too common. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see it picks up on all the first names. Now, this may end up being a very tedious search, but it's another way to try to skin the cat, another way to use index or searching material to try to find what you're looking for.
Nice. Love it. They love it too. Someone said so many nuggets of wisdom tonight. Love it.
You know, one last comment. Sometimes, and even in European church records, you may see the occasional. I know the first time I used Belgian church records, I was surprised. Every 10 years, the priest had made an index. And I didn't
Go
know when
priest.
the kids were born. There were a lot of people in these villages, but those decennial indexes were very helpful because I could go through and make sure I hadn't, because just like the example Jim talked about, the handwriting was easier to read. All I had to, because it wasn't in French or Latin or whatever, all I had to look at was name and reference number. And that was a lot easier than reading. I know we want to read through the whole document for a variety of reasons, but that was a good way to get started with those. Would you
Most
agree?
Absolutely.
definitely. So
Because
we're
the
gonna
handwriting was cleaned up.
go through these steps. Thank you so much, Jim and Michael, for this great quick start. I didn't realize I could talk about indexes like forever. Through an index darkly. Step 1, was the record set index? Number 2, locate the index. Step 3, learn about the different types of indexes. Christine Rose has gotcha. Get her book. Step 4, use indexes creatively. Step 5, obtain and analyze the record. Jim and Michael, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
I think I could talk about indexes more than I can talk about citations. I think,
Oh.
yeah. Don't answer that. I had to get rid of Michael before he answered that. Hello, give me 1 second to split the show. All right. Let me tell you about Rosalyn Green. Not only is she the president of the Delaware Augs chapter, she is also a street genealogist. Yes, Rosalyn came to the very first street genealogy. I remember when I did it at Philly Cam, I didn't know, how it was going to turn out. I just sent out broad messages to the local genealogy groups, Delaware, Philly area, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Come on, we need some genealogists. And Rosalyn came from Delaware to Center City, Philadelphia to help the people just on the street with their genealogy. So I want to welcome our special guest tonight, Rosalyn Green. Hello, Rosalyn. How are you? Is there any way you can decrease the amount of space between the top of your head and the top of the... Yeah. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yes, that's beautiful.
Okay.
So, Rosalyn, first, thank you for being here. Thank you for being supportive of Genealogy Quick Start. And I wanted to ask you what we ask all of our special guests. How did you get started in genealogy? So we want your 1-minute genealogy origin story, how you got started, and when you knew you were hooked.
Okay. Well, I've always been interested in genealogy because my paternal grandmother used to tell us stories, go to bed with us at night and tell us stories. We spent the summers with her about family history. And then later on, as an adult, I had a cousin who was researching that side of the family, and he's finding all kinds of interesting things. But my first record that I ever looked at was in 2010 when I got an offer from Ancestry to see the 1910 census for free. And I looked up all 4 of my grandparents, and I found them with their parents and whatever siblings were living at home. But I didn't want to pay for a subscription at that point. In 2012, I broke down and decided to buy a subscription to Ancestry.com. And I started researching on my mother's side of the family, particularly my mother's father. And his name was Richard Bass. And I was finding so much interesting stuff about him that I was just hooked.
Yes, I can. So, oh my gosh. So we started kind of the same way. Just 2 censuses later, 1930 is when I got started, and it was a wild ride. So congratulations. And I'm really glad that seems like you had a really good experience early on. You were able to find stuff. Sometimes people, they're just like, I can't find anything. So your ancestors were ready for you, I think.
Right. Well, I was a chemistry researcher. So, I had the skills.
You had some skills. I like that. Yes. So Rosalyn, let's look at your quick start for today. It's a lot of fun. I just couldn't imagine this happening in my life, but you call it when the bookmark obituary shatters a brick wall. So I don't know if you explaining it might take us into the quick start. So we might as well just go ahead and get right into the quick start. So
Okay.
that sounds good to you?
That sounds fine.
All right. So step one for Bookmark Obituary Shatters, a Brick Wall, is to read the obituary. So Rosalind, tell us why, how this obituary came into your life.
Well, I received a invitation from my sister who had my mother's cedar chest, and we had gone through my mother's things after she passed away because she told us she wanted us to go through them together. I have two sisters. Well, we never thought about the cedar chest. And a few years later, after my mother passed away, my father he downsized, he sold the house, and he gave my sister the cedar chest. Well, we weren't all together until 2014 in the same place with the cedar chest because we lived in different places. And that's when we started to go through it. And so there was a lot of family memorabilia in there. And my sisters were only interested in the things that pertain to them and people that we knew. And I had been doing research for about 2 years by this time. And so I was interested in everything else, and I just took it.
Okay. And so the obituary was in this cedar chest.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And when
So
when I saw it and I read it, it said that, it was obituary for a lady I never knew. But it said my grandmother was her cousin.
Okay.
And I was just puzzled because I was an adult when the lady died and I had never heard of her. And so
never heard your mom talk about her, nothing.
No, neither my mother nor my grandmother.
So you set out to find out who this woman was.
Exactly.
All right. So you read the obituary. That's when you're like curious, what's going on here? Who's my mom? Who's this lady calling my mom her cousin? And so step two is to use the information to research general records. So how did you set off to find additional records?
Well, I knew I'd been doing research in Richmond for quite a while by that time. And I knew that the Richmond City Directory they had entries on Ancestry as late as the 1950s. So that's where I started. I started looking for her there in the Richmond City Directory, and I found her.
Okay. And I think, okay, so you look for in the general records, and we'll go through the steps and then we'll show all the documents.
All right.
I just had to show the cedar chest because that just warms my heart every time I think about, the family, get your mom saying, this is how I want it done, and y'all get together and do it. I think that's beautiful. Sometimes family actually do the opposite during this time. So step three is to create a timeline. So what type of timeline? How did you create your timeline?
Well, as I said, I started with the latest period in time that I thought I might find a record available. And initially I started going back through the city directories, looking for her a little bit at a time. And I found out where she was married to her husband, that I found out what his name was. So now I'm looking for an Addie Payne and a James Payne. And so then I decided to find their marriage record, because I knew that the marriage record, if she's related to if she's a cousin, she's related through, the parents, the grandparents, or whoever. So I've got to go back in time to find the family. And so what I did was I found their marriage record, and that gave me the parents' names. So now I know her maiden name.
Okay. So you just you took all of those records that you had and you just kind of arranged them in order.
Right, exactly.
Okay. And so then step 4 is to analyze what you found. So you've already kind of shared how you did some analysis, and I want to show some of your records because you have a lot of records that you found. So let's show this one first. I don't know why. Here we go. So what are we looking at here?
So this is the Freedmen's Bank record from my great-grandfather, Richard Bass. And two of the things in that record are, first of all, it tells me his father is dead. it tells me that his mother's name is Catherine Allen and his sister's name is Mary Bass. So the fact that their names are there means that they're still alive.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was searching, and I kept searching in vain. I've been searching for that was one of the first records I found when I started doing genealogy research, and I couldn't find them anywhere,
Okay. Okay. And that's the beautiful chest of your mom's. And this is the bookmark obituary for Addie B. Payne. Okay.
Yes, and it says that my grandmother Rosetta Bass is her cousin.
Okay. So this is what came out of that chest that started this search, this brick wall. Okay. Close up on it. And so these are some of the records you talked about that you use to construct your tale.
Exactly, yes, to create the timeline. And so when you're creating a timeline, what you're trying to do is to weave back in time through the records, to try to reconstruct this person's life. And here, this record, initially, it shows that she's a widow. So in 1958, she's a widow, but she's the widow of James C. Payne. Okay. And then in 1938, they're both alive, and it tells me that he was a clothes cleaner.
I love how the city directories do this. That's why it's so cool to be in an urban area.
Right. Yeah, and it gives pretty much his business address and the home address. So here's the marriage record, and of course, one of the main reasons I was looking for the marriage record was because I wanted to know who the parents were.
Okay.
So this tells me that her parents are John F. and Mary E. Brown. And so now, and I believe it probably tells that she's single too. So that tells me that this Brown would be her maiden name.
Okay.
Addie Glenn Brown. Well, yeah, that's right. The fact that she's got the same name as the parents. So that's her maiden name.
Okay. I love getting those marriage records, getting those maiden names.
Right. So then the next thing is to try to find her with her parents.
Okay.
And so because she was married in 1911, I knew I had to look for her. Well, I looked for her in 1910, and I did find her with her father and someone else. But then the 1900 record. So I'm still going back in time. The 1900 record tells me that, and if I had just looked at the 1910 record, I would have thought that woman in that 1910 record was her mother, but it was not. When I looked at the 1900 record, it tells me the father is a widow.
Okay.
And so, but it turns out the stepmother and the mother had the same first name and middle initial.
I've had a cousin who married women with the same name.
Right. So I'm looking for a previous wife. Well, at that point, and when I came up with this timeline, I was in Richmond doing my research for the very first time. And the last night, I came up with this idea of doing this backwards timeline. So all of these records I put together in one night. The one thing I couldn't find online was the marriage record for her parents. And I had to go to the Library of Virginia. It was the last night. So that was my first mission when I went to the Library of Virginia. And I was able to find the marriage record for her parents. And it tells me that her parents' names are Edwin and Catherine Bass.
Okay.
Then I knew. That was my aha moment.
Yes.
Because I knew I had already found the marriage records for my great grandparents, and it told me that the parents were his parent. That my great grandfather's parents were, I think it said Ed and Catherine Bass.
Okay.
So I said, okay, this is his sister.
Okay.
So this is Mary Bass, and it says that she's Mary E. Bass. So I said, that's who I finally found Mary Bass.
Okay.
Okay, so this, that's when I came to the conclusion. So this is my great grandparents' marriage record. Okay, he's listed as an Edward and Catherine Bass, but I know I've done enough research to know that a lot of times Edwin and Edward they're used interchangeably.
Yes, I told someone spelling does not count in genealogy. Like, you're not looking to put someone in a cookie cutter. You're looking to put someone within a profile of a lot of different aspects that you know besides the spelling of their name.
Right. And so now I know that that's my grandmother's first cousin, and I was really surprised. I had no idea she had any first cousins still alive at that point. Well, I never knew any that she had any at all.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. So basically, all these marriage records are giving you all this detailed information about parents that are helping you to get to your conclusion that they're first cousins.
Right. Yes.
And so let's talk. You have some slides that deal with analysis. What do we have here?
Okay. So what happened was, after I came back home, the first day after I came back home, I decided to print out. I found her in the 1880 census. They found the parents in the 1880 census. I decided to print it out. And that's when I saw on the page that it was on the same page as my great grandparents.
Oh.
And then I looked at so there's Richard J. and Rosa Bass with Irvin F. Bass. And that's my grandmother's oldest brother.
Okay.
Actually his name is Urbane, but in this particular record, he's Irvin. And then I noticed that the next person down is a Catherine Morris.
Yes.
And so that's when I realized that the reason why I couldn't find those women, both of them had married between that 1870 record. They married, and I was able to eventually find her, Catherine Morris's marriage record. And it did indeed indicate that she was Catherine Allen when she married somebody named Morris. But a bonus for me was that here is her mother is living with her.
Right.
And so now I've gone back to my third great grandmother now.
All in one, just looking for getting to the bottom of who is this Addie.
Exactly. And I had seen this record of my great grandparents, the 1880 census, when I first started researching my great grandfather. But I noticed that there were 3 families living at the same address, but I had assumed it was a triplex.
Okay.
I'm thinking 3 people living in 3 different homes, with the same address,
Yes.
And it turned they probably were all living in the same big house.
So this is it sounds to me like an example of, you had this record, but you were looking for something specific. And you did not spend the time like most of us do, looking up and down and around the page and drawing connections, because you didn't realize or even think that there was a connection to be made. But
exactly,
just looking at it again, look at those records 3 or 4 times, right?
Exactly, yeah. And we it's called a fan club, friends, associates, and neighbors.
Yes, got to get that fan club in there. What do we have here?
And this is a Addie Payne's actual death record now, and that was not online for a long time, but it actually and here if I'd had access to that initially, I would have solved it right away, because it does tell me that her mother's name was Mary Bass, and the interesting thing is my grandmother was the informant on the record.
Oh my gosh, very cool.
Right. Yeah.
Very cool. Isn't it nice how all these records, like we were like slaving, trying to find them and get them. Some of us paid all this money to get these vital records, and now they're a click away. So I think that's pretty nice. I'm not complaining.
Right. I have a cousin on that side of the family who's doing research for a long time, but he had to do it the old-fashioned way, going to all these archives,
Yeah. But the journey is fun. It doesn't matter.
That's
we
right.
enjoy the journey. And so you say you get all this information to go ahead and write the story. Have you had any, I got as far as like blogging. I have not written any book. How have you found ways to get your family story out there?
Well, one of the things I do is I do little like tables and stuff with a little bit of, text in there. And I give them to my relatives, whatever, my sisters and my nieces and nephews, and then my cousins on whatever side of the family I'm on. That's one thing I do. On my father's side, I actually wrote a book, and it's just for my father's descendants, my grandparents, the descendants of my father's parents, talking about the summers that we spent with his parents.
Oh my!
And I gave that to everybody on, all of the descendants of my grandparents there. Um, I also wrote an article on that was the main story that my grandmother told me about on that side of the
Oh.
family, and I published that in the in the local journal, historical journal of the Historical Society where my father was from. My father's family was from.
Oh, fantastic.
I've written I think I've submitted one, I can't remember, it was one or two things to the Oggs News, Oggs Journal rather.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, did you put that story that you submitted to the local historical society, did you put that in Oggs? I'm sure Guy would, he's always probably looking for articles.
Yeah, I have a lot of articles up here that I have to write. And what's hanging me up is I want to find that last little detail.
Yeah. That is so hard. So that is my problem all the time.
Right.
Like with everything that I do, when do you stop researching and start writing? Like, how do you know when to start actual writing? How did you know it was okay? Okay, now I can write this book.
Well, that's what came out of that was when my grandmother lived with my father's mother, lived with his sister the last few years of her life. And so when my aunt got ready to move, my cousin asked me to go through my grandmother's room and I could have anything I wanted, and she asked me to take the pictures and put them on a CD for everybody. I haven't done that. But when I saw the pictures, I realized I had enough to write a book because they lived on a farm. They had a picture of the house from 1938, a picture of all the farm animals, all kinds of pictures in there. And so that was the impetus to use to write the book. So I had about 50 pages worth of pictures and 50 pages worth of text.
Okay. So
that's what prompted that. But the article that I wrote on my grandmother's grandfather, because that's the one she told us about, I had enough information and I wanted to get it out there. And it was 2019, and which was the anniversary of the first Africans landing in Virginia. So I just thought it was a good historical story to put together and to publish in the local historical society. So my cousin had been wanting to do it for quite a while, but he was looking for a picture of my great-great-grandfather. And I decided, you know what, but the pictures that I had, I said, there's a picture of the house that he lived in. There was a picture of my great-great-grandmother and a picture of my great-grandmother, because they were part of the focus of the story. Yeah. So I decided that would be good enough. I said, if they, I thought the story was good enough that that wouldn't be the hang up.
Okay. So it sounds like it's a combination of the time is right. And it's like a feeling that you say, okay, this feels like it's go time.
Yeah. And I co-wrote that with my cousin, who done a lot of the research.
Wow. You worked together with a family member. So just so that everyone knows, Rosalyn's family was on here waiting for her before we even started. So thank you I love when cousins come in to support. Thank you, cousins, for coming in and supporting Rosalyn. So Rosalyn, I want to go through these steps for your quick start. Thank you so much for this. The steps for when the bookmark obituary shatters a brick wall. And of course, we don't have brick walls at Genealogy Quick Start. We flow like water. But, step 1, read the obituary. Step 2, or the object that you find. Step 2, use the information to research general records. Step 3, create a timeline of what you find. Step 4, analyze what you find. Step 5, write a story. And wow, Rosalyn has really jumped in there, and you have books, you have articles, and just your family is lucky to have you, Rosalyn. And so are we at Genealogy Quick Start. So thank you so much for being here. And we're going to bring Jim back. Hey, Jimbo.
Yo.
And we're going to say thank you again, Rosalyn, for being here. Thank you, Jim. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic research life. See you soon.